Hello and welcome back to the Daily Express's Royal Roundup. This is your weekly live, or perhaps you're watching it on catch-up, Royal digital live series where you can catch all of the latest royal news. I don't know if you've been across all of the Daily Express sites this morning, or perhaps have picked up the paper, but a big news story has been breaking with Harry and Meghan reportedly being evicted from Frogmore cottage. Well, with all the latest on this, we have Daily Express's royal correspondent Richard Palmer. Richard, welcome. So tell me the latest on this, because this has all been coming to light over the past 24 hours.
Yes, it was confirmed last night by the Sussex's spokeswoman that they've been asked to vacate the property. So it's and during the day yesterday, before that, it became very clear that it was right that they'd been asked to leave, I'm one of our colleagues was just saying before we started that he couldn't believe it. Anybody was surprised about it, given what's happened. But I have to say I was surprised, because it goes against some of the briefing that's been taking place. That the King wanting to take the higher moral ground, not react publicly, not that he loves both his sons. They remain very much loved son and daughter-in-law, and we know that when they came back for the Jubilee last year, a very senior royal official went out of his way to brief the media at a financial briefing that the King had been delighted to meet up with Harry and Meghan again and to see his grandchildren. So, and there's been, some people, not the palace officially, I have to say, but some people in the royal circle sort of talking up the idea of a reconciliation before the coronation. And it's hard to see any of that happening, given that, as far as we can tell, the King reacted the day after the book came out, Harry's book, the memoir Spare came out, essentially said, right, we want you out of Frogmore Cottage. So, I've certainly, I spoke to one of his former communications secretaries a few weeks ago, talking about the coronation. Do you think that he will invite Harry and Meghan to the coronation? And she said, yes, absolutely. The King's not a vindictive man. And I think that while many people will say that this is understandable given everything that Harry and Meghan have done, I think it does suggest that he is being quite vindictive. Actually, this is it's been described as an act of vengeance.
Well, this is also public. Roberta has commented saying this is a family matter. The Sussex's spokesman has confirmed this, but has anything actually come yet from Buckingham Palace?
No, there was nothing yesterday. It was a no comment. I can't really explain why, but there are some times when the palace reaction, even if they don't say much or anything, tells you, if you've been experienced covering this beat, tells you that this is true, or at least it's substantially true. And there are other times when I think it's quite plain to see that that story isn't a run.
Well, Leah Buxton says, need to sell off a lot of these properties and give back to the country. We're the ones who are paying off for these through our taxes, downsize and only keep what's necessary. But Richard, from what you know, this property that they've got won't be exactly, sold off to the public. This will still be part of the royal estate, the Windsor Estates, and potentially you might have someone new moving into it from the royal family.
Well, yes, there's. As far as we understand it, the king would like Prince Andrew to move in there, the background to this is a rationalisation of royal finances. That Andrew is obviously no longer a working member of the family. The king appears to be saying behind the scenes that he doesn't believe that Andrew, who shares the property with his ex-wife, he lives in one wing and she lives in another. It's a 30-room property set in 98 acres of land. The king seems to believe that Andrew won't be able to afford to stay there. I'm not sure. I don't believe that's necessarily the case because we've also been hearing from friends of Andrew. He doesn't have anybody authorised to speak on his behalf officially at the moment, but we've been hearing that he's got a £10 million war chest ready to try to clear his name, possibly overturn the out-of-court settlement he reached with Virginia Giuffre over her claims that she was trafficked and forced to have sex with him when she was 17. So he does appear to have money. We think he's inherited money from his mother, but for whatever reason, the king seems to want him out and out of Royal Lodge. Again, there's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle put together here. There's been some speculation that he would like William and Kate to move into Royal Lodge, and they've vacated. Well, they haven't vacated, but their official residence, Department 1A at Kensington Palace, a 21-room apartment, massive place. They're not really living there. They have retained it as their official residence, and their team are still holding meetings at Kensington Palace, but they're living on the Windsor Estate in Adelaide Cottage, a fairly small property. There's not even room for their nanny. So there's been some speculation that, this is being lined up for them. Without saying too much, I'm not getting the impression that is on the cards, certainly at the moment.
No, and of course
you can never rule these things out, but that doesn't look as if that's going to be happening.
No, what am I correct in thinking they renewed this last year, or was it the year before? They renewed their sort of lease on this property, and they spent over £2 million refurbishing it, which they paid back.
Yes,
so they have actually invested millions of pounds into this property.
Yeah. So this property, I think it's owned by the Crown Estate, but it is part of what's known as the occupied royal palaces. So it's sort of brought within the royal. Because the Crown Estate really very little to do with the king. He owns it in name only. It's an independent property company set up to make profits for the government. Yes, the taxpayer spent £2.4 million and probably a bit more, but 2.4 million was the bit that was declared in one financial year, and then I think there was further spending the following year. On refurbishing it for them, because it was originally 5 separate properties, or previously 5 separate properties for staff. Brought it all together, made it into a luxury 5-bedroom house, and when they quit their royal duties, they agreed to repay the taxpayer for that money, and also paid rent up front for several years. We were told this at the annual, if I remember rightly, the annual finance briefing, which happened in September in 2020. It's usually in the summer, but because of COVID and everything, there was a delay. So yeah, it's intriguing. As I say, I think I think many people, and we're seeing quite a few comments here
saying, "Well done." Yeah, Sheila said,
well done.
Yeah.
I think the British public, majority of the British public has lost patience with them, and will support what the King's done here.
And of course,
and I think the idea that he's doing this for the nation, or he's doing this, but the idea that he's this is not an act of vengeance, it to me seems silly. He's getting his own back here.
He's well aware of the public reaction that this will cause.
Yes.
Fiona said Harry has publicly said that his home is in America. One of the arguments, Lorna says this is another side of it, keep it balanced. How can anyone evict their son is beyond me. Of course, this is a family at the end of the day. But one of Harry's arguments, has been over the years when he's moved across the pond to the UK is coming back and security. Now, this was with the Home Office. Now, one of the things about them having that, of course, you're on the Windsor Estate, which is very, very secure. It does have police protection all around it. This, of course, might cause a little bit of an issue for when they come over next from a security perspective, I can imagine.
Well, if they come over next, yes, because we understand they haven't been offered another property. Absolutely, as you say, living there offered them security within the cordon at Windsor. And if they haven't got that, then they are going to say they feel very vulnerable. Whether that's the case is another, is debatable. But they say they don't feel safe in the UK, but the US California's got a much higher murder rate than the UK has, much higher crime rates, I think. Yeah. So, but clearly we know that they. They have been a target of far right.
Yes, they have.
So we know that there is that potential there.
So, Richard, from your perspective, then you say obviously this is quite vindictive, in your words, for a father to do this to their son. What do you think the tipping point then was for Charles to do this?
Well, I think clearly it was the memoir coming out, and I think we always understood that criticism of Camilla would be a red line, and my guess is that the focus on Camilla in that book was the final straw for the King.
Yeah, maybe. Bridget says, obviously, this was a gift from the Queen, as I'm sure with lots of other gifts that perhaps we don't know about from that amazing wedding when obviously relations between them was all happy, and also with the public. Bridget says the Queen would turn in her grave with what's happening with her family, should I say. Richard, you reported on the Queen when she was alive for many, many years. Do you think that she would be upset over this?
Yeah, I think she's always been somebody who naturally tried to hold the family together. So, in the case of Andrew's ex-wife Fergie, for example, she was also always trying to include her where she could. She realised that that Sarah, Duchess of York, was, although no longer a member of the royal family, still the mother of her grandchildren, and she wanted to keep ties open with her, whereas Prince Philip, when he was alive, just wouldn't have anything to do with her. Okay. So I think the Queen, I think Queen Elizabeth would be devastated by what's happening, but then equally, she took the tough decisions. She took that when they said they wanted to quit in January 2020, there were a range of options open, and it was she who are backed by then Prince Charles and William, who said you can't be half in, half out. So, in a way, she's precipitated a lot of this.
Yeah, Christine says it's a disgrace what Harry and Meghan have done to the royal family. They did not want to live in this country. Why should a house be kept from them with all that expense that involves better? Someone else lives in it.
Yeah.
Do you think Andrew is keen then to move in and leave his, from one very large mansion to a rather large house? It makes me laugh when you call it a cottage.
No, I don't think he wants to downsize at all. He's very unhappy about it, and he's resisting efforts to get him to move. So I think there's going to be a battle royal over that, by the sounds of it.
Interesting. Harry, Meghan, and Andrew perhaps agreeing on something.
Yeah. Just to allude to it, a couple of people have posted messages which I think raise quite an interesting point. And I think it's that the vast number of properties that are at the disposal of the royal family is a bit of an embarrassment to them, I think. And, I think there will be some uncomfortable scrutiny of the House of Windsor because of all these properties. If Royal Lodge is vacated and nobody moves in, I don't know. That's good. I mean, I suppose what they could do is they could rent it out commercially if there's a millionaire out there who's looking for a place on the Windsor Estate. There are other royal properties that have been rented out commercially in the last few years as they've tried to increase revenue and reduce the burden to the taxpayer.
And of course, you've got people who also aren't fans of Andrew. Andrew should be moved from the royal estates. I mean, that's not going to happen anytime soon, is it?
Well, I don't believe so. I think they'll keep some sort of property for him, but who knows? I mean, he's no longer a working royal, and the same with his daughters. Really, they don't represent the monarch in any way on official duties. I think Andrew was always that when they were going off to university and just after, they decided, as far as we were told, it was their decision that they didn't want to have a life of ribbon cutting. They wanted to have their own careers. And yet he still wanted all the privileges for them, the HRH titles, princess, having access to, properties inside the royal cordon, originally in St James's Palace. It may well be that the king is trying to cut costs, and all of those people.
Yeah, and as you said, Richard, they're probably due to this story. There's now going to probably be eyes on the royal finances and what everyone's got in terms of their budgets. I've got a comment here from Andrew to downsize is ludicrous as Andrew on a budget. You said that he's got this £10 million
yes.
backup budget. Have you, Richard?
Yes, that's what some of his friends have been saying.
Madeline, you see, he's a single man and not a working royal. Why should he have use for a 30-room mansion? There's lots of corgis. That is one thing. Lots of corgis. But no, all very, very fair, valid comments. Okay, so when is the eviction happening? Do we know any of those details? Because I can imagine they've got stuff there.
They've got stuff there. I think they've already moved some stuff out, but they've been given until the summer, as far as we understand it. Initially, I think it was sooner. So, in theory, they could stay there during the coronation. They could come over briefly, stay there, and benefit from the security cordon, and they'd also be, I think, protected because they were attending a high-profile national event that was inevitably going to attract fixated individuals and other people who might pose a threat to members of the royal family. So I don't think there will be a security problem for them if they come over briefly and stay at Windsor. But I've been forced to look at things again. I think I was being told that the king wasn't a vindictive man and would be had invited them. I still understand that to be the case. I believe that there's been a private invitation to them, but it may well be, we're not talking to you. We're not, we're really fed up with you. But if you want to come, you're invited, but don't expect to get a wonderful welcome. So it may well be that they don't come.
Okay. Well, it's drawing ever closer, isn't it? It's March now, and of course they won't be in the back seats. They'll need to be near the front somehow, not on the front row. I'm sure they'll need to be near the front.
The dates are going out next week, I think, and then the formal invitations go out in April, much nearer the actual event.
Okay, I'm sure there'll be lots more to discuss on this topic, but we're going to move on now from Harry and Meghan. But still on the topic of the royals, King Charles this week has had a little bit of political controversy. So let's talk about that now, Richard. We can see here meeting. This comes at a time where Rishi Sunak is very much still talking about Brexit. It's still very much a talking point at the moment. And of course, Charles does meet with him every single week, doesn't he? As with all the other prime ministers. So it's dangerous territory. And we have actually spoken about this before, Richard. But why in particular was this so dangerous this week?
Well, I think there was a big fuss about his meeting with Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, because mainly people who were suspicious of the deal that Rishi Sunak had just brokered with the EU over the Northern Ireland trade arrangements. Felt that the Prime Minister had used the King to bolster support for the deal he was announcing, and I think it was unusual to have such a meeting without there being consensus, without there having been a vote in Parliament or anything. I mean, there are two ways to look at this. I mean, first of all, the monarch routinely meets visiting world leaders, visiting heads of state, heads of government, and other world leaders. You could argue, as some supporters of the King have argued, that if the Prime Minister of the day requests him to meet a world leader who is coming over here for some talks and is going to be in Windsor, then he's more or less under a constitutional obligation to agree to do that. In a constitutional monarchy, the King acts on the advice of his ministers. And you could argue, as others have argued, that had the King refused to do that and said, this is too sensitive, it's too political, you're drawing me in to support something that hasn't been agreed in Parliament yet, it might have been a bigger controversy and a bigger row. That's the case for the King. The case against the King is that he allowed himself to fall into a trap to be manipulated by a Prime Minister who is trying to win support for a controversial deal. And I think it's accepted by people close to the King that it was ultimately his decision, and he could have privately just said, I'm really sorry, but I don't think I can do that, or found a reason not to be there. I don't know. it's a really tricky one for the king, but I think it's a bit of an elephant trap for him. To add to that, I mean, you have to put it in perspective and say this is not the first time there's been a controversy like this.
No.
I mean, Queen Elizabeth II was embroiled in controversy in 2019 when she agreed to Boris Johnson's request to prorogue or suspend Parliament, and that, the Prime Minister at the time was making that request to avoid further scrutiny and an unravelling of his Brexit proposals, and there was a huge amount of controversy about that, and ultimately it was challenged in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that that the Queen had acted unlawfully in proroguing Parliament. So it's not the first time it's happened, and there have been also other cases. I mean, you go back to 2014. David Cameron was asking the Queen, can we're in a bit of trouble in Scotland. There's a referendum coming up on independence. We think we might lose it. Is there something you can say or do that would help us to stop this happening, stop the Scots voting for independence? And she, very, very measured terms, spoke to people outside Crathy Church up at Balmoral, and local media who were there were sort of invited to come closer and listen, as far as I understand it. And, she said, I hope people will think very carefully about the future. And, it was deemed enough to have created, just to have stopped the momentum for independence. And, that again, that's a tricky constitutional issue for any monarch, because there is a elected prime minister at Westminster, but there is also a first minister in Scotland who's been elected, and the king is the monarch of Scotland as well.
I mean, what I would say to this, do you think that the king is well aware and he's being a bit naive?
I think there are quite a lot of people, long-time royal observers, who think that he was trying to tread a very careful line, but that he probably made an error of judgment there. He was probably badly advised, and that he should have found a reason not to have met her at that stage. We know that going back to the Queen met Sinn Féin leaders as part of the Irish peace process, but that was long after the Good Friday Agreement, years after. It was really setting the seal on the whole peace process rather than playing a key role at an early stage.
Opening a can of worms.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is kind of weird. I mean, you go back further, 1972. There was controversy over the Queen going on a tour to Europe to sort of bolster Ted Heath's government's decision to join the then EEC. In her Christmas message that year, she spoke enthusiastically about Britain joining the European Economic Community, and it was another 3 years before there was actually a referendum on that essentially British people were given a vote on it and did vote to join the EEC. And then you go back even further to 1938, and I think people now would say that George VI and Queen Elizabeth, his wife, the future Queen Mother, made a big mistake in appearing on inviting the Prime Minister of the time, Neville Chamberlain, onto the Buckingham Palace balcony with them to celebrate peace in our time. The Munich agreement that essentially carved up Czechoslovakia, and is now seen as one of the major acts of appeasement, the folly of appeasement, that made Hitler even braver, and ultimately led to the Second World War. Equally, I suppose you could argue that the Munich Agreement gave a bit more time to Britain to rearm, and had it all kicked off in 1938.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, this comes at a time where there is a cost of living crisis. Lots of people are not very happy with the government at the moment because of the political chaos that, and very controversial decisions over lockdowns, all the rest of it over the past few years. And people have been put in very, very difficult situations. But would the king ever let know, in terms of his political leaning or anything like that? Because if you were to see, the royal family's background, etc., you would tend to think, wouldn't you? Most people would say conservative, right?
Well, you might, yes. I think you don't really get a sense of that from them, and it would be sheer folly for them to do that. I mean, there have been occasions. I mean, I think the Countess of Wessex was caught out slagging off Tony Blair at one point, and there will be tensions. I mean, go back to 86, was it? And the Queen's then. One of the Queen's senior aides briefed the Sunday Times that she was at odds with Margaret Thatcher over her attitude towards the Commonwealth, and also, I think the royal family exists to knit society together, and Margaret Thatcher was arguing that there was no such thing as society, and there were a lot of divisive policies at the time that the Queen apparently didn't agree with. So you do get these moments from time to time, these bits of tension. I mean, we had one last year when, at the time that the Commonwealth Summit was on in Rwanda, when people in the Home Office were briefing that the King had been lobbying the Home Secretary over. I think it was over immigration matters.
Oh, yes, yeah.
There was tension there, and royal sources were extremely peeved, and they felt that the government was using Charles to try to deflect from many of the problems that the government had at that point.
Okay. Well, this topic does come up again and again, royals and politics. So I'm sure we'll come back to it at a later date. But people are saying in the comments, well said, Richard, you know your royal history, that's for sure, and political history for that matter, even though you are not a political reporter.
I know.
They do cross over. So there we go. Let's talk now about the Queen Consort, because she also got in controversy this week over freedom of expression and Roald Dahl books, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. So there she is, and she made a speech, didn't she, Richard, where she declared her leaning on this.
She did. First thing to say is, unbeknown to me, my paper decided this week to start calling her the Queen. So we're not the first. The Times, I think, was the first. The Times and the Sunday Times and the Telegraph, I think, has been calling her the Queen for a little while. I wasn't asked my opinion. If I'd given my opinion, I would have said probably wait until the coronation. Then I think the palace will. Well, I think, as I've said here before, I think the palace will stop calling her the Queen Consort after the coronation. I think there's been an effort to try to put some distance between her and the previous Queen Elizabeth II. And when you talk about the Queen, I think it creates some confusion in the minds of readers. As a journalist, what you don't want is people who are reading your story sort of stopping halfway through a sentence and going back and saying, hang on, who's he talking about? Is he talking about?
Absolutely.
Anyway, that appears to be the policy. So anyway, Yes, she made a speech at a delayed reception to mark the second anniversary of her online book club, the Reading Room, which is and announced there that she's setting up a charity on the back of it that is going to be called the Queen's Reading Room. The palace said, "Oh, it's being called the Queen's Reading Room because Queen Consort's Reading Room is a bit of a mouthful." They created Queen's Companions to replace Ladies in Waiting. They said, "Oh, Queen's Consort's Companion is a bit too much of a mouthful." You might take that with a pinch of salt, and you might say it was just paving the way for what we expected. But anyway, yes, she urged authors to stand up for their freedom of speech. And somebody here is saying Camilla's statement was simply common sense. I think it helps the issue of free speech. Hasn't shut it down, as many insist. We're a long way to go. So the background to this is that Roald Dahl's books are being updated and have been checked by sensitivity readers who have taken out references to various things, including, I think, people looking ugly or
yes, negative words.
Yes. She didn't mention Dahl by name at all, but it was an obvious reference to it, and indeed, there was. We were being told you should take that as a broad reference to the Dahl controversy. So, again, I think many people will say good for her. She's standing up for freedom of speech. A former BBC correspondent tweeted that she was fine to standing up for Roald Dahl, but not for Meghan, Harry and Meghan, particularly Meghan. When she was slagged off by a newspaper columnist, Jeremy
Clarkson,
who happens to be a friend of hers. But I suppose you say, well, she was standing up for freedom. Perhaps she was standing up for freedom of speech there. And
of course, Harry has also spoken out against Camilla too. So
Yes, yeah, exactly. Again, there are always two sides to the story. I think there's a book that Agatha Christie wrote, which is now known as "And Then There Were None," or it has been known as 10 Little Indians, but it was previously known as something else with an N-word in, and such. Life has changed so much that I can't even say that word now. I mean, I would probably be, up on disciplinary count if I mentioned it on here, the same word has disappeared from a much-loved British war film, The Dam Busters, because there was a dog there that had a name that is now deemed offensive. So attitudes do change, language does change, sensitivity about language changes. The really interesting thing was that the day after she spoke out, Puffin, the publishers of the Dahl books, announced that they had listened to the discussion about all of this over the past couple of weeks, and had decided to create two different versions. One, a classic series of the books that contain all the old language, and one, a newer version with the sanitised language. So it will be interesting to see which sells better. And
yes, I suppose it will.
Whether the schools buy one version or the other.
Yeah, this is true. But obviously, she's always, been by Charles's side for quite a few years now. But obviously with this new role, she's coming out in public a lot more. With controversy like this, do you think that's kind of showing perhaps a sign of weakness, or perhaps struggling to adapt to her new role and understanding, there are some certain lines that she can't push?
No, I would say it's a sign of her confidence in her new role, and she's speaking out more because I think she feels as if she's, she's in an unassailable position now, whereas obviously years ago she wasn't, and her people were telling us for years that she didn't want to be called Queen. She was quite happy just helping her husband. But it is interesting, I think, because I think we are seeing a new side to the monarchy. I mean, of course, you could look back and you say, well, Prince Philip was the consort, and there were times when he said some really outrageous
things.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It depends. I think we are seeing a different side to Camilla.
We are, and we're also seeing what she loves. I mean, we've also got a comment from Hib saying Charles and Camilla have always supported artists and writers, and this is true. And she's genuinely, obviously, very passionate about this. I hate that phrase, passionate, but she is, and that statement makes sense, and it certainly does. I think the Express website had a poll that we can bring up here. Ignore the top of it. Is it wrong to rewrite the books? Ronald, Is it wrong to rewrite the books such as the ones by, let's just say, Roald Dahl? Because the original text in places might offend people today? Yes, 73%. No, 9%. 15-ish%. I don't know. So there we go. Well, there are now going to be 2 copies, according to Richard. So choose what you will wisely. And just to finish things off, then, Richard, we'll know more about coronation plans, obviously nearer the time, and who will attend. But there has been one story which has kind of been floating about this week, which I thought would be a good one to finish on, and that is who is going to be making the music for the coronation, for that concert. Obviously, we want the best of British, wouldn't we? When you think of best of British, perhaps you'll think of Elton John, Spice Girls. Perhaps they're not for you. And there are a few other British stars, such as Adele or something, which takes your fancy. Well, they're obviously all very, very busy people, and apparently a couple of them, this has not been confirmed, but rumours are flying around that they've declined. So, Richard.
Yeah, I think, I have to say I've not written this story. I've not checked it, so I don't know what the facts are. But it's been quite widely reported that Elton John, Adele, Harry Styles, I think, the Spice Girls have all said they're too busy to perform at the coronation concert. It doesn't really surprise me. I think a lot of artists are very busy, and they have busy schedules, and I'm sure that there will be an all-star lineup that will be impressive, but we will have to wait and see to see the
Yeah, indeed. Charles looks very, very young there, and so do the Spice Girls actually.
He's got some lipstick on his cheek, isn't it? It's quite a famous photo, that one.
It's a great photo. Richard, do you know who performed him and now the Queen's wedding? Do you have any idea?
Who performed at the wedding?
Like a bit of a reception or anything? I'm just wondering who he would actually genuinely like there.
No, you've got me there now. I can't.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, he's a huge fan of Leonard Cohen, but of course Leonard Cohen's dead now, and wouldn't necessarily be very uplifting. Even if he was alive, wouldn't necessarily be a very uplifting show from Leonard Cohen. I love him, of course, the 3 Degrees. He was always into the 3 Degrees. More recently, not so sure.
Not so sure. Well, I'm sorry for throwing you that question. I was just intrigued. I think I missed a poll earlier about the ongoing saga between Harry and Meghan, so we'll just bring that up, and then we will close today. Do you think Harry and Meghan should fight back after being reportedly evicted from Frogmore Cottage? No. 90%. So that's the Royal Roundup poll for you. Yes, 10%. Well, I'm sure we'll be hearing lots more about that story as the day goes on, and I'm sure Richard will keep you updated on his Twitter at Raw Reporter, and we'll keep you updated on the Daily Expresses too for further clarity on it. Richard, thank you. Lots to talk about this week. We'll be back again the same time, maybe by an hour or two, next week. So that's next Thursday. And we premiere on YouTube on Fridays, and you can catch all of our playlists over on Facebook too. Richard, thank you. And thank you everyone for your comments today. They've been great.